Our first understanding is that William Harvey discovery of the circulation of blood with the heart acting as a pump. Firstly, William Harvey's experimental work showed how blood is circulated around the body. Before he conducted his experiment, it was mainly the Greeks who had authority on the movement of blood, who were Pliny the Elder and Galen. They claimed that blood was constantly being used up in the body and did not consider the closed circulation patterns we now know exists. Galen stated that there are two separate blood networks: arteries pumped vital blood that's produced by the heart and distribute through the arteries to carry the vital spirits, and veins pumped nutritive blood that was made at the liver. Galen also claimed that the blood flowed from one ventricle of the heart to another through tiny pores. This claim by Galen was the thinking of all people trained in medicine for more than 1300 years.
Some of the personal knowledge on William Harvey is that he's a 17th century English physician and published in the book De Motio Cordis on the motion of the heart and blood. Back to his research, after animal dissections, live animal experimentation, and human cadaver dissections, William Harvey determined that the heart acts as a double pump. Specifically, arteries and veins are part of a single connected blood network. He found that arteries pumped blood from the heart to the lungs and the body tissues, while veins returned blood to the heart from the lungs and body tissues, concluding that blood constantly circulated to the body from the lungs and the heart. His findings did not show capillaries that connected arteries to veins, but did postulate their existence.
In the heart, there are 4 different types of valves: the mitral, tricuspid, aortic, and pulmonary valve. More detail about the different valves will be talked about in detail later on in this video. Depending on the pressure in each valve, the heart valve opens and closes in order to maintain the balance within the heart. The change in pressure occurs with movement of the blood throughout the chambers. The left and right side of the heart works at the same time as a double pump. In the heart, there are 3 stages that are included in the cardiac cycle: when the atria and ventricle are at rest, when the atria is at diastole with the ventricle at systole, and when the ventricle is in diastole with the atria in systole. Diastole is when a certain chamber in the heart is relaxed, and systole is when that chamber is contracted. Note that the understanding of this section is that pressure changes in the left atrium, left ventricle, and aorta during the cardiac cycle. First, we will be taking a look at the process that occurs when the atria and ventricle are at rest. Because the chambers are at rest, it means that the chambers are undergoing diastole. The picture on the right is a diagram of how the left side of the heart would look like. Following this visual will help to get a better grasp on the concept. First, the heart valves open and close depending on the blood pressure difference between the valves. When both chambers are in diastole, the atrial pressure happens to be slightly higher than the ventricle pressure, which keeps the atrioventricle valve open. During contraction, the blood that flows from the pulmonary veins moves passively through the left ventricle and through the opened atrioventricle valve. The pressure from the aorta happens to be more than the left ventricle, just like the atrium and ventricle, therefore keeping the left semilunar valve closed in order to avoid backflow into the ventricle. This diagram shows the second step in the cardiac cycle, when the atria is in the systole and the ventricle is in diastole. The same understanding is applied. The pressure that is produced by the systole contraction is not very high because the wall of the atrium is a thin muscle and cannot create much pressure. This is because there is no need for massive pressure, since most of the blood has already been gathered during the previous process, when the blood flowed from the ventricle to the atrioventricle valve. The small amounts of blood that was remaining in the atrium is moved to the ventricle by the contraction of the systole process.
When atria is in diastole and the ventricles are in systole, the ventricle systole begins, and the pressure inside the ventricle increases to be greater than in the atrium. The pressure of aorta is still more than in ventricle, so semilunar valve stays closed. A large volume of blood is kept in the ventricle during this time. The combination of factors allow pressure to build up a lot as systole continues. The pressure in the ventricle becomes more than in the aorta, and the semilunar valves open, allowing ventricle to pump blood into aorta. The ventricle's contraction leads to the pressure being dropped lower than pressure in aorta, leading to semilunar valve to close. Both chambers go back into diastole, and the cardiac cycle repeats over and over again.
Arteries, capillaries, and veins. Understanding. Arteries convey blood at high pressure from the ventricles to the tissues of the body. Blood vessels are tubes that carry blood. There are mainly three types of blood vessels, and there are arteries, capillaries, and veins. Arteries are blood tubes that are relatively thick, smooth, and muscle layer used by the autonomic nervous system to change the inside diameter of the blood vessels. Blood in arteries is at a high pressure because arteries are directly connected to the ventricles of the heart.
Understanding. Arteries have muscle cells and elastic fibers in their walls. Arteries are composed of thick layer containing elastic fibers that maintain high pressure between pumping cycles and muscle that contracts or relaxes to adjust the diameter of the lumen.
Understanding. The muscle and elastic fibers assist in maintaining blood pressure between pump cycles. Elastic fibers help maintain the relatively high blood pressure achieved by the contraction of the ventricles. When blood is pumped into an artery, the elastic fibers are stretched and allow the blood vessel to accommodate the increased pressure. When the contraction is over, the elastic fibers provide another source of pressure as they return to their original position, and this helps maintain the blood pressure between pump cycles. And in this, you can see where muscle and elastic fibers are placed in arteries.
Understanding. Blood flows through capillaries. Capillaries have permeable walls that allow the exchange of materials between cells in the tissues and blood in the capillary. Blood cells go through capillaries one cell at a time. Chemical exchanges always occur through capillaries because the walls of arteries and veins are too thick to allow molecules in or out efficiently. As you can see in this diagram, red blood cells from the artery carries oxygen and nutrients, and they give them to the body's cells, and red blood cells going to the vein carries carbon dioxide and wastes.
Understanding. Veins collect blood at low pressure from the tissues of the body and return it to the atria of the heart. An atria is a plural form of atrium. Veins are blood vessels that collect blood from capillaries and return it to the heart. Veins have thin walls and a larger internal diameter because veins receive blood at the relatively low pressure from the capillary beds. The blood flow through veins is slower than through arteries because of the loss of blood pressure.
Understanding. Valves in the veins and the heart ensure circulation of blood by preventing backflow. Veins have many internal passive one-way flow valves that help keep the slow-moving blood traveling consistently towards the heart.
Skills. Identification of blood vessels as arteries, capillaries, or veins from the structure of their walls. And this chart is a summary of the structure of arteries, capillaries, and veins.
So there is a double pump in the circulatory system. One of it is the systematic circuit, which is mainly used for for the oxygenated blood to transport the oxygenated blood from the left side of the heart to be pumped to the rest of the body, such as hands, legs, and other organs. The pulmonary circuit is primarily used for sending deoxygenated blood from the right side of the heart to the lungs for the exchange of gases to occur. Another understanding is the recognition of chambers and valves of the heart. One way that I'd like to think about this is the rule of 4. Now, there are 4 chambers, 4 valves, and 4 major blood vessels. So, regarding the chambers, there's a right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. 4 valves, there's a right atrioventricular valve, the right semilunar valve, the left atrioventricular valve, and the left semilunar valve. And there are 4 major blood vessels, which are the aorta, the vena cava, separated with the superior and inferior, and the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. So here we will see more accurate diagrams of the heart. So on the left side of the heart deals with oxygenated blood, and the right side deals with deoxygenated blood. And the valves inside the heart restrict the backflow of blood in the So we have the right atrioventricular valve, which connects the right atrium to the right ventricle, the right semilunar, which connects the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery, the left atrioventricular valve, which connects the left atrium to the right ventricle, and the left semilunar, which connects the left ventricle to the aorta. Now, when drawing hearts, it is important to note that you label the heart the opposite way as if you would have it inside of you. For example, you would label the atrium you draw on the left side the right atrium.
Next, we need to understand heartbeat. The UASs for this topic are on the top right, and we're going to go through them in simpler terms. So in the right atrium, that's the upper part of the heart, there is a tissue called the sinoatrial node. Because this is a ridiculous long name, we just call it the SA node. The SA node is what regulates how fast the heart beats because it sends a sign to the atria. Get it? Because sinoatrial. When the atria get this signal from the SA node, they contract, and that's the first beat you hear when your heart pumps. The atrioventricular node, or AV node, is another tissue in the atrium, and it receives the signal from the SA node. Then it waits about 1/10 of a second and sends its own signal to the ventricles of the heart that tells them to contract, and they do, and that's the second pump of a heartbeat. Exercise, our heartbeat gets faster so that we can get rid of excess carbon dioxide and maintain proper cellular respiration. So our brain has a sensor called the medulla that senses carbon dioxide levels and sends signals to the SA node to regulate heartbeat. As you can see in the diagram here, when the medulla senses too much carbon dioxide, it sends a signal through a nerve called the cranial nerve to the SA node that says, go faster, go faster. And the SA node does its normal signals, but it does it more frequently. So nothing else changes about the process except for it goes more frequently so that the heart beats faster. And when the medulla senses that there is less CO2, like after exercise, when it doesn't need to beat as fast anymore, the medulla sends a signal through the vagus nerve that says go slower to the SA node, and the SA node begins to do it less frequently. Heart rate can also be influenced by chemicals. One example is adrenaline. And when your body is excited or under high stress, the kidneys release this chemical, which makes the SA node fire more rapidly, which increases the heart rate, as you already know.
In arteries, the collective buildup of materials that is referred to plaque leads to a condition called atherosclerosis. Plaque is composed of lipids, cholesterol, cell debris, and calcium. The inside lining of each artery is known as the endothelium, and in a younger person it is smooth, since there is no plaque buildup. Usually it takes multiple years for the buildup of plaque to lead to the arteries becoming narrower, harder, and less flexible, to the extent where it is considered a serious problem. However, it is possible to deposit plaque throughout the years, depending on multiple factors, with genetics and eating habits being major ones.
There are 3 main coronary arteries that supply oxygen-rich blood to the heart. The arteries branch directly from the aorta carry blood that has been transported from the lungs. The heart muscle or cardiac muscle contracts continuously through periods of systole when the ventricle contracts and diastole when the heart refills with blood. The cardiac muscle needs constant oxygen flow. Therefore, if one of the three main coronary arteries are blocked, that part of the cardiac muscle will lack oxygen supply. Atherosclerosis will ultimately result in a partial or complete occlusion, the condition in which the artery can no longer supply sufficient amounts of oxygen-rich blood to the heart. Once one of its major arteries is completely blocked, the condition of coronary thrombosis or acute myocardial infarction arises. This is known as a heart attack.